You are on HOA rejected. The mailbox cluster heard every threat. The contractor truck idled at the curb, engine ticking in the drizzle, and Laura screamed that she would blacklist the contractor if he touched another board. This is not a discussion. This is a directive. Her voice cut through the wet air like a siren, and I stood there with my flashlight clipped to my pocket, rain soaking into my blue jacket, watching her drag that stupid portable folding sign stand into the middle of the driveway like she owned the asphalt. The contractor, a guy named Mike who had been doing fences in Colorado Springs for 20 years, just stared at her, with his hand frozen on the door handle. Laura Collins, Special Assessment Coordinator for the Kingsbridge Homeowners Association, chin-length blonde bob dripping under her gray windbreaker hood, red bucket hat somehow still perched on top, pointing at him like he was a war criminal. "I do not negotiate with violations," she said, and I felt my chest tighten because I knew this was about to get worse. I work as a cable installer, so I know easements and property lines better than most people in this neighborhood. I had spent the last 3 months saving for something important, a down payment buffer so I could finally breathe a little, and the HOA had decided to target me over a fence that was not even finished yet. Laura had shown up 2 weeks earlier with a tape measure and a clipboard. No readable text on the papers, but I knew what they said, claiming my fence was 6 inches over the setback line. She measured it like a crime scene investigator, snapping photos with her phone, calling it a nuisance before I even had the gate latch installed. The latch squeaked once during a test swing, and she wrote it down, said it was disturbing the peace, threatened fees starting the next day. The HOA gave me a cure deadline that expires tonight, and they threatened daily fines starting tomorrow. Laura had sent 3 notices in 10 days, escalating language each time, talking about liens and legal action like she was the district attorney. Mike the contractor had a schedule, other jobs lined up, and he told me this morning he could finish the last section today if we started now. I called him, he showed up, and 30 seconds later, Laura appeared in a golf cart with a blinking amber light, crawling up the street like a funeral procession, and now here we were. She waved a packet at Mike, some kind of tow invoice or contractor violation form, flapping it in the drizzle like a weapon. "If you proceed, I will ensure you never work in this HOA again," she said. "I have done this before, and people fold every time." That line, "people fold every time," stuck in my head like a splinter. I kept my plan quiet, because the HOA depends on controlling the narrative. I had been gathering proof for 2 weeks, recording conversations, printing covenant pages, talking to a notary who helps me organize sworn statements, but I was not ready to show my hand yet. Laura did not know I had the actual covenant section, proving she quoted the wrong clause. She kept citing setback rules from a different part of the documents, misquoting inches as feet, and I had the original language highlighted in a binder in my truck. But the trump card, the real one, I was holding that back until the right moment. Mike looked at me, rain dripping off his hood, and I nodded. "We are finishing today," I said. Laura's face went red. She pulled out her phone and started filming. "This is being documented," she said. "You are in violation of a stop work directive issued by the Architectural Review Committee." "I did not receive a stop work directive," I said. "You received 3 notices," she snapped. "Notices are not stop work orders," I said. Mike started unloading a fence panel, and Laura actually stepped in front of him, physically blocking the path to my yard. The pry bar I had been using earlier was still lying on the wet ground near her feet, and for a second I thought she might pick it up. Instead, she turned to me and said, "This will cost you more than you can afford." The HOA was already threatening a special assessment, some garbage about neighborhood improvements, and Laura had made it clear she could add line items whenever she wanted. Management sends contradictory instructions like a trap, one email saying I am allowed to finish, another saying I need board approval, and Laura ignores the first one every time. Mike set the panel down and looked at Laura. "Ma'am, I have a signed contract with this homeowner, and no legal order to stop. You are not a law enforcement officer," Laura pointed at him again. "I am the Special Assessment Coordinator, and I have the authority to levy fees and sanctions." Mike shrugged. "Then levy them." He picked up the panel and walked past her. Laura actually yelled, her voice cracking, "You are making a mistake." But Mike kept walking, and I followed him, carrying a post hole digger and a bag of concrete mix. Laura stood there in the driveway, shaking, her golf cart blinking behind her like a tiny ambulance, and I knew this was not over. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, smash that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. We worked for 3 hours, Mike and I, sinking posts and leveling rails while Laura sat in her golf cart at the curb, filming and making phone calls. A dog walker stopped on the sidewalk, pulled out his phone, and started filming from a safe distance, probably thinking this was going to end in an arrest. The drizzle picked up, turning the dirt around the posts into soup, and I mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow while Mike braced the rails. Every 20 minutes, Laura would shout something, "This is going in my report," or "You are accumulating fines by the hour," and I just ignored her. The notary, a woman named Janet, who lived 3 streets over, had already told me the HOA constitution required written stop work orders with board signatures, and Laura had never provided one. That was my first piece of evidence. The second piece was a recording I made last week, when Laura admitted in a phone call that the fence design I submitted was actually approved by the previous board, but she was overriding it because she did not like the style. The gate latch went on last, and it squeaked exactly once when I tested the swing. Laura stood up in her golf cart like she had just witnessed a felony. "That is the nuisance I cited," she yelled. "That squeak is prohibited under community standards." I pulled out a small can of WD-40 from my jacket pocket, sprayed the hinge, and swung the gate again. Silent. Laura looked like she wanted to throw something. The dog walker was still filming, and I gave him a thumbs up. Mike packed his tools and said, "You are going to need a lawyer." "I know," I said. He drove off, and Laura immediately rolled her golf cart into my driveway, blocking my truck. "We need to talk," she said. I leaned against my truck bed and crossed my arms. "Go ahead." She pulled out a folder, rain spotting the cover, and started reading off charges. Unauthorized construction, $300. Refusal to comply with architectural review, $500. Nuisance violation, $200. Contractor misconduct, $1,000. Daily continuation fees starting tomorrow, $100 per day. I let her finish. "You are misquoting the setback rule," I said. "You cited section 4.2, which applies to front yard fences." My fence is a side yard fence, covered under section 4.5, which allows up to 6 feet with no setback requirement as long as it is behind the front building line. Laura blinked. "I have the covenant right here," I said, and I pulled a binder out of my truck, tabbed and highlighted. She did not even look at it. "The board has discretion to interpret," she said. "Not when the language is unambiguous," I said. She snapped the folder shut. "You will be hearing from our attorney." The next morning I got an email from the HOA management company, a woman named Diane, saying the board had scheduled an emergency meeting for tonight, and I was required to attend. The subject line said compliance hearing, and the body of the email said failure to appear would result in automatic sanctions. I forwarded it to Janet the notary, and she replied within 10 minutes. "They cannot hold a hearing without giving you 72 hours notice per the bylaws. This is another trap." I printed her email, added it to my binder, and drove to work. I spend my days climbing poles and running cable through HOA neighborhoods, and I see this stuff everywhere. Boards that think they are legislatures, managers who act like enforcers, neighbors who call in violations because someone parked 2 inches over a driveway line. Kingsbridge is worse than most. The HOA depends on people being too tired or too scared to fight back, and Laura knows it. At lunch, I sat in my truck and called the HOA attorney, a guy named Ross, whose name was on every legal notice. I told him I had evidence that Laura misquoted the covenants and that the board never issued a valid stop work order. He sighed. "Look, I just do what the board tells me. If you have a dispute, bring it to the meeting." I asked him if he had seen the covenant section I was talking about. He paused. "Send it to me." I sent it. 20 minutes later, he called back. "You are right about the setback rule," he said. "But Laura is claiming the fence violates the aesthetic standards, and that is subjective." "What aesthetic standards?" I said. He did not answer right away. "I will talk to the board." That was not the trump card, but it was a crack in the wall, and I knew I could use it. That afternoon, I drove to a hardware store to pick up some paint for the fence, and when I came out, Laura was in the parking lot, filming me with her phone. She stood next to her car, hood up, red bucket hat somehow still dry, and she followed me across the lot, narrating into the camera. This is the homeowner who refused to comply with a lawful directive. He is purchasing additional materials to continue unauthorized construction. People in the parking lot stared, and I just kept walking. Laura got louder. He has been warned multiple times, and he continues to disregard the authority of the Kingsbridge Homeowners Association. I loaded the paint into my truck, turned around, and walked straight toward her. She kept filming. I stopped about 3 feet away and said, "You are trespassing in a private parking lot, and you are harassing me. If you do not leave me alone, I will call the police." She smiled. "Go ahead." I pulled out my phone and dialed. She left before the dispatcher answered. The meeting was tonight at 7, held in the HOA clubhouse, a beige box with a conference room that smelled like old coffee. I showed up at 6:45 with my binder, my printed emails, and a USB drive with the recordings. Janet met me in the parking lot. She had printed and notarized 3 sworn statements from neighbors who confirmed they had never received any notice about my fence being a problem until Laura started her campaign 2 weeks ago. I added them to the binder. Inside, the board was already seated, 5 people behind a folding table. Laura at the far right end with her folder open and her phone face down next to it. The room had about 15 neighbors scattered in chairs, most of them looking uncomfortable. I recognized a few, including the dog walker who had filmed the standoff. I sat in the front row. Laura did not look at me. The board president, a man named Ed with a gray beard and a tired expression, called the meeting to order. He read through some standard business, approvals for landscaping changes, a budget report, and then he said, "We have a compliance matter regarding the property at 428 Ridgemont." Laura immediately stood up. This homeowner has repeatedly violated architectural review standards and refused to comply with directives from this board. He completed construction without approval, ignored multiple notices, and allowed a contractor to proceed after being warned of sanctions. I request the board impose the maximum penalties allowed under the covenants and issue a lien if payment is not received within 30 days. Ed looked at me. "Do you want to respond?" I stood up and opened my binder. First, I never received a stop work order. I received 3 notices, none of which were signed by the board, and none of which cited the correct covenant section. Second, the fence complies with Section 4.5 of the covenants, which allows side yard fences up to 6 feet with no setback requirement. Laura cited Section 4.2, which applies to front yard fences. Third, I submitted a design to the Architectural Review Committee 8 months ago, and it was approved by the previous board. I have the approval email here. Fourth, Laura has been harassing me and my contractor, including filming me in a public parking lot and making false statements about my compliance. I have recordings and witness statements. I held up the binder. Ed looked at Laura. "Did you issue a stop work order?" Laura hesitated. "I issued notices." "That is not the same thing," Ed said. "What about the approval from the previous board?" Laura's face went tight. "That approval was conditional, and the homeowner did not meet the conditions." "What conditions?" I said. She did not answer. Ed asked to see the binder, and I handed it to him. He flipped through the tabs, stopping at the covenant section, the approval email, and the notarized statements. He passed it to the board member next to him, a woman named Carol, and she read through it with her mouth slightly open. Laura stood up again. "Even if the setback rule does not apply, the fence violates aesthetic standards. It is not consistent with the neighborhood character." Ed looked at me. "What color is the fence?" "Natural cedar," I said. "Same as 6 other fences on this street." Carol nodded. "I see them every day." Laura sat down hard. Ed closed the binder and handed it back to me. "I do not see a violation here." Laura's voice went sharp. "You are ignoring the nuisance complaint. The gate latch is disruptive." "I fixed the latch," I said. "There is no squeak." Laura pulled out her phone. "I have video evidence." Ed held up a hand. "We are not going to vote on a gate latch squeak." That was when Laura made her mistake. She stood up again and said, "I move that we impose the penalties I outlined and proceed with a lien. The board has the authority to interpret standards as needed, and this homeowner has demonstrated a pattern of non-compliance." "I second," said another board member, A man named Todd who always voted with Laura. Ed looked annoyed. We need to discuss this first. Laura cut him off. I call for an immediate vote. Ed stared at her. You do not have the authority to call a vote. I am the Special Assessment Coordinator, Laura said, and I have the authority to enforce compliance. Ed closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The board will discuss this matter in executive session, and we will notify the homeowner of our decision within 10 days. Meeting adjourned. Laura looked like she had been slapped. I waited in the parking lot while the board went into executive session. Janet came out and said, "You won." "Not yet," I said. "Laura's going to escalate," Janet nodded. "She always does. Be ready." I drove home and spent the next 2 hours going through my recordings, looking for the one piece I needed. The twist I had been holding back, the thing that changed everything, was buried in the old HOA minutes from 3 years ago. The property line dispute Laura kept citing, the one she claimed justified all the setback enforcement, had already been settled by a survey commissioned by the previous board. The survey showed my fence was completely within my property boundaries, and the board had voted to close the matter. Laura had been on the board at the time. She had voted yes. And then she hid the page when the new board took over. I found a scanned copy in the county records office last week, and I had been waiting for the right moment to use it. The next morning I got a text from Janet. Laura filed an appeal with the management company. She is trying to override the board. I called Diane at the management company, and she confirmed it. Laura submitted a formal complaint claiming the board failed to enforce the covenants and requesting that the management company impose sanctions directly. Can she do that? I asked. Diane sighed. Technically no, but she is citing an emergency clause that allows the management company to act if the board is unresponsive. Your board just met last night. I know, Diane said. I am required to forward her complaint to the board and schedule a follow-up hearing. When? 2 weeks. I felt my chest tighten again. That was more fees, more time, more stress, and Laura knew it. I hung up and called Ross, the attorney. He did not answer. I left a message. I need to know if the management company can override the board decision. Call me back. That afternoon I was on a job, running cable through an attic in a neighborhood 2 miles from Kingsbridge, and my phone rang. It was Ross. I stepped outside. The management company cannot override the board, he said, but they can recommend sanctions, and the board can vote to adopt them. Laura is trying to create a paper trail that makes it look like the board is not doing their job. If she succeeds, she can force a special meeting and stack the vote. What do I do? I said. Show up at the follow-up hearing with everything you have, and be ready for her to bring something new. What do you mean? Ross paused. She always has a backup plan. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice of a special meeting, scheduled for next Tuesday at the sheriff's substation lobby. Neutral ground requested by the management company due to concerns about meeting decorum. The letter said I was required to bring all documents related to my fence, my property line, and my communications with the board. Failure to appear would result in automatic sanctions. I called Janet, and she came over that night. We went through everything, organizing tabs, printing extra copies, labeling exhibits. She looked at the old survey minutes and said, "This is your trump card. When are you going to use it?" At the meeting, I said. "I want Laura in the room when it comes out." Janet smiled. She is going to lose it. The next week moved like a slow-motion car crash. Laura showed up at my house twice. Once to take more photos of the fence. Once to leave a handwritten note on my door. No readable text, but I knew it was another threat. The golf cart with the blinking amber light became a fixture on my street, crawling past my house 3 or 4 times a day, and neighbors started asking me what was going on. I told them the short version, HOA dispute, property line, Laura being Laura, and most of them nodded like they had their own stories. One guy, a retired engineer named Paul, said Laura had tried to fine him last year for parking his truck in his own driveway. He fought it and won, but it took 6 months and cost him $1,000 in legal fees. That is her strategy, he said. She does not care if she is right. She just wants you to give up. The night before the meeting, I could not sleep. I went through my binder one more time, checking every tab, every exhibit, every recording timestamp. The trump card was in the back, a single page, the old survey minutes with Laura's name in the vote column. I had a second copy in a sealed envelope, addressed to Ross the attorney, ready to hand over if Laura tried to bury it again. Janet had told me that exposing board misconduct in a public meeting could trigger insurance issues, and I was counting on that. The Kingsbridge HOA insurance carrier had already sent a warning letter last year after a lawsuit over improper meeting procedures, and one more complaint could push them over the edge. If the insurance carrier threatened non-renewal, the board would have to act fast or risk losing coverage for the whole neighborhood. That was the leverage I needed. Tuesday came and I drove to the sheriff's substation at 6:30. The meeting was scheduled for 7 in a small conference room off the main lobby, and when I walked in, Laura was already there, sitting at a mediation table with her folder open and her phone face up. The board president, Ed, was there, along with Carol and Todd. Diane from the management company was there with a laptop, and Ross the attorney was there, sitting at the end of the table with his own folder and a notepad. A deputy was standing near the door, arms crossed, watching. Janet was not allowed in because she was not a party to the dispute, but she waited in the lobby with her phone ready in case I needed a witness. I sat down across from Laura and put my binder on the table. Ross looked at me, then at Laura, then at Ed. Let us get started. Ed opened the meeting by summarizing the situation, the fence, the notices, the first meeting, Laura's appeal. Then, he turned to Laura. You requested this meeting. What is your position? Laura opened her folder and pulled out a new document, something I had not seen before. Since the last meeting, I have obtained an independent survey of the property at 428 Ridgemont. The survey confirms that the fence encroaches on the HOA common area by 4 inches along the rear boundary. This is a violation of Section 6.1 of the Covenants, which prohibits any structure on common area property. I move that the board order immediate removal of the fence and impose a lien for the cost of surveying and remediation. She slid the document across the table. Ed picked it up and read it. Ross leaned over to look. I felt my heart pounding. That was her backup plan. Ross flipped through the pages. Who commissioned this survey? Laura smiled. I did, using my discretionary budget as special assessment coordinator. When? Last week. Ross looked at Ed. Did the board approve this? Ed shook his head. Laura sat back. I have the authority to commission surveys when there is a compliance dispute. Ross closed the document. That is not accurate. The board has to approve expenditures over $500. Laura's smile faded. This was a necessary compliance action. Ross looked at me. Do you have a response? I opened my binder and pulled out the old survey minutes. I slid them across the table. 3 years ago, the board commissioned a survey of this same property to resolve a boundary dispute. The survey confirmed that the property line runs along the rear fence post line, which means my fence is entirely within my property boundaries. The board voted to accept the survey and close the matter. Laura voted yes. This new survey contradicts the old one, which means either Laura's surveyor made an error or Laura is misrepresenting the results. Either way, the board already settled this issue, and Laura is relitigating it without authorization. Ross picked up the minutes and read them. Ed leaned over. Carol did too. Todd looked at Laura. Laura's face went white. Where did you get that? She said. County records, I said. You hid this page when the new board took over, but the county keeps copies of all recorded HOA documents. Ross looked at Laura. Is this accurate? Laura did not answer. Ed put the minutes down and looked at Ross. What does this mean? It means the board already ruled on this issue, and the ruling is binding unless the board votes to reopen it. Laura did not have the authority to commission a new survey, and even if she did, the new survey does not override the old one without board action. Ross looked at Laura. You need to explain why you did this. Laura stood up. I was acting in the best interest of the community. Ross cut her off. You were acting outside your authority, and you withheld material information from the board. That is misconduct. Laura grabbed her folder. This meeting is over. Ross stood up. Sit down. The deputy by the door shifted his weight. Laura sat. I pulled the sealed envelope out of my binder and handed it to Ross. This is a second copy for you, so the legal risk is obvious. Ross opened it, read the page, and looked at Ed. If this becomes public, your insurance carrier is going to have questions. Ed closed his eyes. How bad? Ross set the page down. Bad enough that they might issue a non-renewal warning. The board needs to address this immediately, or you could lose coverage for the entire community. Carol looked at Laura. You need to resign. Laura's voice went shrill. I have done nothing wrong. Todd leaned forward. You hid evidence, commissioned an unauthorized survey, and tried to force a vote using false information. That is misconduct. Ed rubbed his face. I move that we drop the case against 428 Ridgemont and refer Laura's conduct to the insurance carrier for review. Carol seconded. Todd voted yes. Laura stood up again, grabbed her folder and her phone, and walked out. The deputy watched her go. Ross looked at me. You are clear. The board will send you a written confirmation within 48 hours. The next morning, I got an email from Diane at the management company. The board met an emergency session last night and voted to remove Laura from the special assessment coordinator role. They also voted to commission an independent audit of her discretionary spending over the past 2 years. Preliminary findings suggest multiple unauthorized expenditures totaling over $12,000. The insurance carrier has been notified and has issued a non-renewal warning. The board has 30 days to implement reforms, or the carrier will not renew the policy. I forwarded the email to Janet, and she called me immediately. You did it. Not yet, I said. I want to make sure Laura does not come back. Janet laughed. She is not coming back. The insurance thing is going to force the whole board to resign, and the neighborhood is going to elect new people. You just saved this HOA from itself. That afternoon I was back at work, running cable through another attic, and I got a text from Paul, the retired engineer. There is a petition going around to recall the entire board and elect new members. 60 signatures so far. Do you want to sign? I texted back yes. By the end of the week, the petition had over 100 signatures, and the board called a special election for next month. Ed resigned immediately. Carol and Todd followed. Laura tried to stay on as a regular board member, but the neighborhood group chat, which I had been added to after the meeting, turned into a hurricane of screenshots and recordings. People sharing their own stories of Laura's threats and bogus fines, and within 3 days, she resigned too. The new board was elected in October, and the first thing they did was vote to refund every fine Laura had issued in the past 2 years. I got a check for $2,000, covering fees I had paid under protest during the fight. I saw Laura one more time, about a month later, in the parking lot of the same hardware store where she had filmed me. She was getting out of her car, no golf cart, no blinking light, just her in a plain jacket, and she saw me and froze. I walked past her without saying anything. She did not film. She did not yell. She just stood there, and I could see it in her face, the realization that her whole strategy, the bluffing, the threats, the fake authority, had collapsed the moment someone kept receipts and refused to fold. I got in my truck and drove home, and I have not seen her since. The fence is still standing, the gate does not squeak, and my savings account is back where it was before this whole mess started. The new board sent me a letter apologizing for the previous board's conduct and thanking me for holding them accountable. I framed it and hung it in my garage, right next to the old survey minutes. I still work as a cable installer, still deal with easements and property lines, and I still see HOA boards that think they are untouchable. But now I know the trick. Keep records, know the rules, and do not fold when someone tries to bluff you into submission. Laura learned that the hard way, and so did the Kingsbridge board. The insurance carrier ended up forcing a full governance review. The new board rewrote half the enforcement policies. And the neighborhood is quieter now. Less drama, less fear. More people actually using their yards without worrying about a golf cart rolling up with a clipboard. The funny part is that Laura tried to interrupt the vote at the final meeting before she resigned. Tried to call a point of order, or some procedural garbage, and the meeting just voted anyway, right over her objections, and she stood there sputtering while the room counted hands. That moment, watching her realize she had zero power left, was worth every hour I spent building that binder. I will bring you another one next time.